This video is brought to you by the Historigraph poster store. We've got two new posters for sale on the Battle of Jutland in 1916 and the surrender of the German High Seas Fleet 2 years later. Follow the link in the description to check them out. During World War II, more than 100 battleships from 12 different navies took part in the war in some way or another, but only one of them saw significant action fighting on both sides. That was the Richelieu, a French battleship with quite the story to tell. In 1940, Richelieu was France's newest battleship. So new in fact that she wasn't ready for service when German troops cut through Allied lines at the start of June and threatened the collapse of France. As hostile troops pushed west and closer to Richelieu's base at Brest, the battleship was hastily put through basic sea trials and then loaded with fuel and ammunition, ready to follow a long-standing plan to sail to a British port to continue fighting if France was overrun. But on June 17th, the plan changed. With the possible armistice with the Germans being discussed by the new government under Philippe Pétain, the French fleet had become a powerful bargaining chip. The head of the French Navy, Admiral François Darlan, therefore determined that it should remain independent and ordered Richelieu's Captain Marsan to take his ship to the port of Dakar in French West Africa to await developments. But as Richelieu steamed south, the military situation in France collapsed completely, and by the time Captain Marsan arrived at Dakar on June 23rd, the atmosphere there was febrile. An armistice was expected almost at any moment, which made things complicated as there was still a British aircraft carrier in port and other British warships nearby. As news of the signed armistice filtered through on the morning of June 25th, the alliance with Britain melted away and was replaced by mutual suspicion. Captain Marsan was ordered to sabotage his ship or sail to the US if attacked by the British. He instead decided to leave Dakar and sail north to Casablanca, where he hoped things would be calmer. Richelieu slipped her mooring at 2:30 PM and headed out of the harbour, followed swiftly behind by HMS Hermes. As the British aircraft carrier passed powerful French shore batteries, they trained their 240mm guns on their former allies. Out at sea, the shadowing of Richelieu was taken over by the cruiser Dorsetshire, but no sooner had the French ship approached Casablanca, she was ordered back to Dakar by Darlan, who apparently feared that Marsan was taking his ship further north to join the Allies. Dorsetshire again shadowed the battleship on its return voyage, keeping a watchful eye as each side tried not to provoke the other. The atmosphere worsened again at the start of July, as Britain's determination to ensure the French fleet did not fall into German hands combined with Churchill's desire to demonstrate the Empire's resolve to continue fighting. On July 3rd, a British fleet sailed to Mers el-Kebir in French Algeria and gave the ships there an ultimatum to either join the Allied side or sail to port in the West Indies, and when this was refused, they opened fire, sinking one battleship and killing almost 1,300 French sailors. Retaliatory air raids were launched by French aircraft on Gibraltar the following day, and in the space of a week, Britain and France had gone from being allies to fighting an undeclared war. It did not take long for this war to reach Richelieu at Dakar. By July 7th, Hermes and Dorsetshire had been joined by HMS Australia, and the British formation was ordered that if Richelieu tried to leave port, she was to be shot at, torpedoed or rammed if needed to halt her progress. Whereas the French at Mers el-Kebir had viewed British threats as a bluff, Captain Marsan did not make the same mistake, and considered sortying himself in an attempt to sink Hermes with the few 15-inch shells available to him. But before any such attack could be made, at 4:15 AM on the 8th, Hermes launched Swordfish aircraft for a torpedo attack on the French battleship. 5 torpedoes missed, but the last struck Richelieu's starboard side, damaging its propeller shafts and causing 2,500 tons of flooding, damage which would keep it firmly in port for the foreseeable future. The attack by Hermes turned out to only be the opening salvo of fighting at Dakar, as in the autumn of 1940 the British returned alongside Free French forces under General Charles de Gaulle. Codenamed Operation Menace, the Allies planned for de Gaulle's troops to land at Dakar and bring it to his side, giving the Allies a key naval base in West Africa and a vital foothold in French territory there. General de Gaulle was confident that his arrival would be warmly welcomed by a French garrison he assumed would be keen to throw off Vichy and continue the fight. But unfortunately for him, quite the opposite happened. When in September an Anglo-Free French force arrived at Dakar, it was shot at. Over the course of 3 days, Free French ships repeatedly tried to get close to the port, backed by British battleship fire, but were kept at arm's length by the spirited resistance of French cruisers and shore batteries, with Richelieu firing from her static berth inside the harbour. The Allies reluctantly called off their endeavour on September 25th, after the battleship Resolution was torpedoed by the submarine Beauvaisis and damaged. In the fighting, Richelieu was hit a couple of times, once by a large caliber shell from one of the battleships. She suffered damage to her armour belt to go with the torpedo damage suffered in July. In normal times this would have been very minor damage, but with no dry dock at Dakar it was impossible to fix properly, so the battleship remained essentially immobilised, with only a few of its main guns still working. It would remain like that for the next 2 years, as the war raged on elsewhere and the Allies did not make any further attempts at capturing Dakar. But on November 8, 1942, the Allies did arrive to the north, launching amphibious invasions of Vichy French-controlled Morocco and Algeria. By the end of the month, the German army had occupied the remainder of mainland France and attempted to seize the French fleet at Toulon, leading to Admiral Darlan, along with French North Africa, coming over to the Allied cause. This turn of events transformed the outlook for Richelieu. Far from waiting out the war rusting at anchor, the battleship was sent for a large refit in New York and then brought back into service on the Allied side of the war. Richelieu began active service in the autumn of 1943 as part of the British Home Fleet at Scapa Flow, before being deployed in April 1944 to the Eastern Fleet, based in the Indian Ocean. But after just 3 months deployed with Admiral James Somerville's fleet providing shore bombardment, Richelieu was on its way back to Casablanca for another refit after she developed an issue with her boilers. It took until March 1945 for the battleship to make it east again, by which time the war was in its final stretch. Richelieu took part in a bombardment of Japanese positions at Sabang in April, and then pummeled bases in the Andaman Islands to the point where it ran out of main gun ammunition and had to use its secondary 6-inch guns to bombard Port Blair on May 2nd. After 120 rounds and with Port Blair neutralised as a useful base for the Japanese Navy, Richelieu went on to deploy as part of the force hunting down the cruiser Haguro 5 days later. The French ship, along with the British cruiser Cumberland, trailed behind Manly Power's destroyers as they ambushed the Japanese cruiser, and were close enough to see gun flashes on the horizon as the final action took place. Following this busy period, Richelieu was sent for yet another refit, as she continued to be plagued by boiler problems. This time the destination was Durban in South Africa, which caused serious anger on board when the ship was forced to dock at Diego Suarez en route to put ashore non-white crew members at the request of the South African government. By the time Richelieu's refit was completed and she returned to the fleet, it was August 18th and Japan had surrendered. But the end of the World War was not the end of Richelieu's war service. Through September, the French ships in the Far East helped to restore British control in Malaya and then moved on to reasserting French rule in Indochina, where they were opposed by the Viet Minh. You can find out more about France's battle to hold on to Southeast Asia in our series of videos on the topic. During one battle against the Vietnamese in November at Nha Trang, Richelieu fired almost 400 6-inch rounds in support of French units fighting ashore. It was December before Richelieu was finally sent back to France, as other warships arrived to take over. She continued to serve in the French fleet for years afterwards, though saw no more combat operations before eventually being laid up in 1956 and sold for scrap 11 years later. And so ended the long career of Richelieu, the battleship that fought on both sides. I'd also really appreciate it if you checked out our poster store. There are 2 new posters on sale, and if you become an Historigraph patron, you can get 10% off any poster order. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.